So kann es nicht weitergehen.
This can't keep going on like this. It's a crime against humanity. It is an organized crime against humanity. The third discovery has just been published. And they've shown there, and this is the German group I'm speaking about, our group, that this gene is passed from mother to child through the placenta. Through the placenta, folks. You can't accept that, for heaven's sake. We're now facing the most difficult problem in medicine. Almost unsolvable, because it's completely new. There's no prior experience. It's all trial and error, trial and error. And the question is always, when you try something out, how can you measure success?
Welcome to a new exciting episode. Today, Marc is speaking with Professor Dr. Bhakdi. Mr. Bhakdi, it's great that you have time.
It's great that you have time, Mr. Friedrich.
Yes, you reached out to me, right? You said you had something very exciting to share. The fact is, we're living in historic times, so I believe no one can deny this turning point anymore. Everything is changing de facto. We'll probably never have the pre-COVID era again. And more truth is coming to light. The old narratives are collapsing. Now, of course, I'm curious to hear what you have to say, Mr. Bhakdi.
Yes, Mr. Friedrich. You probably know that we have published a new book. The book was published 3 weeks ago, and many are asking why. 6 months ago, I said I had written my last book.
Exactly, there is a link to the interview at the top.
That's why I want to say that this book wasn't written by me, but rather I'm the editor, co-editor, with a certain Dr. Helmut Sterz. Who is Helmut Sterz? Helmut Sterz is the former chief toxicologist at Pfizer. Pfizer for all of Europe. He's retired now, and he stood up and wrote a book. And this book is a must-read. This book really belongs in every household. Because he has provided the final piece of the puzzle in our story. We wrote back then already that this so-called vaccine was manufactured using an unapproved process. It was never tested for safety and was certainly dangerous. It was evident that the whole thing was planned. That is in our book as well. The only question was, how could this have ever happened? And the answer is provided by Helmut Sterz, the former toxicologist at Pfizer.
Dr. Sterz, you worked as the chief toxicologist for Pfizer Europe. Is that correct?
Yes, that is correct. I was responsible there for all animal experiments related to drug safety.
Thank you. My questions concern Comirnaty from Pfizer-BioNTech. You have dealt extensively with the approval of this vaccine and the documentation. Is that correct?
That is correct.
Was the carcinogenicity of this vaccine tested prior to approval?
No, the carcinogenic risk was not investigated due to time constraints. By the way, I find it very worrying and also regrettable that no alternative studies were conducted.
We are observing in Germany, but also in many other countries, that the birth rate plummeted following the vaccination campaign.
Yes, you are referring to studies concerning reproduction. A study on rats using Comirnaty was inadequately conducted. Consequently, no reliable assessments of the vaccine's effect on pregnancy or the development of offspring were possible. Nothing had been learned from the thalidomide disaster. According to the RKI protocol, approval was granted in a fast-track procedure. This meant that essential toxicity studies were sacrificed for the sake of speed, without acceptable justification. I know of no case with a comparable indication in which all these studies were omitted. Thus, the approval led to prohibited human trials.
So the RKI had noted internally at the time that side effects and vaccine-related injuries were only to be investigated after the product had been launched. What came of that?
Pfizer's post-marketing report mentioned over 1,200 suspected deaths within just 2 months of approval. Comirnaty should have been withdrawn from the market by then, at the latest. If I am correctly informed, the Paul-Ehrlich Institute has received 2,133 reports of deaths following Comirnaty to date. With these spontaneous reports, there is a high number of unreported cases due to underreporting. The actual number is therefore much higher. In the US, an underreporting factor of 30 is assumed, by which the registered cases should be multiplied. For Germany, that would correspond to 60,000 deaths caused by the vaccine.
60,000. So the federal government is withholding the important SafeVac and KV data on vaccination injuries, and the majority of this commission has even refused to request this data. Could vaccine injuries and deaths have been avoided with approval compliant with the regulations?
Yes, because Comirnaty should not have been approved at all under the regulations.
Currently, many vaccine-injured individuals in Germany are fighting for compensation for pain and suffering. They often lose because the courts say Comirnaty has a positive risk-benefit ratio. Is this assumption justified?
In my view, absolutely not. Comirnaty was not tested at all during clinical development for the prevention of severe illness or deaths. Pfizer documents therefore do not indicate a positive risk-benefit ratio at all. Mathematician Robert Rockefeller from the University of Koblenz estimates that for every severe case of COVID-19 that Comirnaty allegedly prevents, there are 25 severe side effects.
Okay, did age-adjusted mortality in Germany decline after the start of this vaccination campaign?
No, mortality rose significantly from 2021 to 2022 compared to 2020. If there had been a positive risk-benefit ratio, mortality should have declined when the vaccine became available in early 2021.
That makes sense. Did the population receive the active ingredient during the vaccination campaign that Pfizer tested in the shortened emergency approval process?
No. A highly purified substance was used for the clinical trial before approval. It was too expensive for mass production. The public received a vaccine produced using the Escherichia coli bacterium. The result is significant contamination with bacterial DNA, and the consequence could be a heavily increased risk of cancer.
Thank you very much.
And he has every reason to know this. He's not just an insider. He's a true expert. He's not a quack. He's not a conspiracy theorist. He's simply an incredibly knowledgeable, honest, and sincere person. And this book really gave me a jolt. If something else comes along now that gives this whole thing another push, then I want to finish Helmut Sterz's book with a sequel, with the final piece that was needed to set everything in motion now, and this piece arrived. At the same time, his book was published. And that is why Helmut Sterz and I have teamed up to publish this new book. And this book is intended to serve as a guide for the public, a guide for lawyers, and a guide for politicians, doctors, and the media. So they know that things cannot go on this way. It's a crime against humanity. It's an organized crime against humanity. And this book has been well received. The book contains only one chapter by me, which was written specifically for it. That's the final chapter, where I included the latest discovery, and why this discovery must turn everything upside down. But there were other discoveries as well. And the next discovery, which I absolutely wanted to include, is not in the book currently on the market. It's in the second edition, which will be released soon, once the first edition is sold out. And the second discovery is that due to the unapproved procedure that was used, and due to the contaminants present, it has now been proven that leads to turbo cancer formation. And the actual integration of this foreign DNA into human genes. And in this case, it causes turbo cancer. The case has been published, it's done, it's a done deal, it's clear, and we report that in this second edition. Now, the fact is that this has become internationally known, and everyone is saying, hey, we heard you published a book with Helmut Sturz. Will it come out in English as well? Because the US publishers are waiting. And this book is now being translated into English right now. Helmut Sturz's book has already been translated and is essentially on its way to the market through a US publisher. And we want to approach this publisher once our new book with the expanded chapter is out as well. And that is the reason why I wanted to announce this. Because the latest discoveries, which are still being made public, concern, first of all, persistence. That means it has now been proven that this foreign gene remains present and active in humans for up to years after the last injection. That means people are genetically modified for a long, long time, perhaps even forever. That's not okay, folks. The second finding is that because of this vaccination, it throws a spanner into the entire works of the human genome at every level. And people are fundamentally modified in their being. This has also been published in top-tier journals.
I'd like to jump in here briefly, perhaps also as an appeal to the viewers, because I hear this time and again. Do you have any acquaintances, friends, relatives, or people in your social circle who suddenly, perhaps without any risk factors, develop cancer, and of course also regarding, yes, changes in their nature? So let us know, because there aren't many studies on this. I told you in a private conversation that my mother was also a victim of this very aggressive, fast-growing cancer in her neck. And even the doctor said, well, it's atypical, we've never seen anything like it. But they added that, yes, this aggressive type of cancer has been on the rise lately. So in that regard, I'd of course be interested, so to speak, in the empirical data that the public can provide. Please feel free to write in the comments, because, of course, this is all information that is important, because, as you said, it might not have been a vaccination after all, but perhaps rather genetic therapy, and that people, of course, react to that.
Mr. Friedrich, it wasn't gene therapy, it was a genetic experiment. You really have to distinguish between the two.
Right, that's true.
And that constitutes a grave, in the gravest way, a violation of the Nuremberg Code. And that is why I'm here with you, because I wanted to tell you, this violation of the Nuremberg Code has now been proven. And the incidence of cancer cases and of diseases in general associated with this so-called genetic experiment has been proven. Yeah, we don't need to do any more work. There's scientific literature on it. It's completely clear by now. And by the way, the third discovery, which has also just come in, and I must throw this in here, of these three discoveries, I'm actually a bit proud to say that in two of them, our lab, our institute in Modia was involved, specifically in collaboration with the Americans. And that is why I'm also asking that the links to Inmodia and MWGFD be provided where you can help, where you can support. Because this whole endeavor involves an enormous amount of effort. Enormous. You can't imagine what all of this costs, not just in money, but in lifeblood, in lifetime, so much work. The third discovery has just been published. There they showed, and this is the German group, our group, that this gene passes from mother to child through the placenta. Through the placenta, folks. You can't accept that. For heaven's sake. So, and now I'm almost at the end. We at the moment are really trying to get our book to go viral. And this time, we've included this link from the world's largest distributor in the US, and for a very simple reason. Because these operators and distributors, you all know them, someone we normally don't want to buy from, but they have a ranking. And if you're in the top 50 or 100, then Americans get to see it, then they are shown it. And the publishers are, of course, very, very eager to pick up the book, to acquire the license. And that would help us immensely. That's one thing. I'd like to say that the last chapter, where these new discoveries come in, is almost the most important part. And I've arranged with Mr. Kopp that these last 10 pages, is only 10 pages, again will be available as sample for all of you to download for free. You need to go to Kopp Verlag, the Kopp Publishing House, and click on the book, and there it says excerpt. Click on that and share, for heaven's sake, these 10 pages with all of your friends. And those who don't want to believe it, tell them this is not just coming from Bhakdi, but from Pfizer's former chief toxicologist.
Yeah, the subtitle of this book says, namely, Pfizer's former chief toxicologist proves how toxic substances were illegally sold to us as a cure for COVID-19. I mean, as you said, chief toxicologist and insider at Pfizer, he was responsible for the whole of Europe. Why wasn't his voice heard before? Or rather, why is he only coming forward with this now?
Well, you know, he knew it right from the start. But he also didn't believe that the vaccine would really come out. He thought, as I did, that it couldn't be true. They wouldn't allow that to happen. And then the vaccine came. So now I'm going to, and I don't even know if I'm allowed to say this, but, well, Helmut, you know, his wife got vaccinated against his advice, and she got sick, and she's still sick. And that almost made him sick as well.
I believe that.
And only after that did he tell himself, I have to do something. And then he wrote his book. That's why we haven't heard from him. He wasn't doing well. And even now, the crisis isn't over. But that's not the book that we wrote together.
Yes, of course. The Vaccine Mafia is a different book, which is good. And you're welcome to mention the title of the new book.
Really, I have to say I'm hesitating because otherwise we'll get shadow banned. Yeah, you know, the last interviews that I did are all basically shadow banned. The last 3.
Okay.
They didn't reach anybody. basically.
So all the more important, dear viewers, if you want to support this topic, if it interests you, if you want people to actually see this topic, even if they might have nothing to do with it or don't want to know about it anymore, share. Feel free to turn on notifications, subscribe, and just spread the word, because as we can see, the whole COVID narrative is falling apart. We can see that those who were supposed to have protected us, in some cases, lied to us outright. We can see that all those crazy people, conspiracy theorists, and the nonconformists were probably right all along. And in that regard, it's important that the truth comes to light. It's coming to light, but you can be a multiplier.
Now, one last point and then I'm done. You know that BioNTech has now become more vulnerable. The board has resigned or will step down, or the founders basically. And secondly, you know that on March the 9th, a ruling was issued by the Federal Court of Justice in Germany. This ruling from the Federal Court, the highest federal court in Germany, is very, very important, and please take the time to familiarize yourselves with this ruling, because this ruling offers hope. Hope because manufacturers are now obliged to provide information when requested, and they will be requested. And this request can be so unpleasant for them that they will face real legal problems in a second stage. I also want to say that this entire development, since it's now established that the Nuremberg Code was violated with fatal consequences, means that the time has come now for the doctors who were persecuted, some of whom were thrown into jail, are currently still in prison, by the way. Now the public have to have the opportunity to secure their acquittal and their compensation.
A quick question about BioNTech. Do you think these are the real reasons why the founders of BioNTech are, so to speak, jumping ship? Or is liability also a factor?
I don't know, and I really don't want to know it.
And what do you think about the Enquete Commission's investigation? Do you think it will lead to anything, including consequences, or is it just a bit of window dressing and sedative for the public?
So far, it's been window dressing. But also here, the tide is turning. The tide is turning there too.
Okay, because some of what's coming out is truly hair-raising and proves once again that many of the critics were actually right. You've probably also heard about the ominous email in the Epstein files between Bill Gates and Jeffrey Epstein. That was also about depopulation, or rather, what to do with the poor people. Yes, vaccinating them away was the idea, and he was also involved with COVID-19. What do you say to these new facts?
Yeah, that's a fact. It's a totally known fact. It's common knowledge by now. It's common knowledge.
Unbelievable, yes.
But if people here want to close their eyes and ears saying that's not true, it's a conspiracy theory, you know, I can't help them.
But Mr. Bhakdi, this is truly so sick and malicious that people are, so to speak, being kept quiet with the vaccination simply because they may not be as well off mentally or economically, and that this is being planned well in advance. I couldn't have imagined this in my wildest dreams. But to me, this makes every conspiracy theory seem like child's play in comparison.
Yes. I have nothing to add to that.
Unbelievable. Of course, I always get a lot of emails now, especially when I have you on the show. The first interview with Mr. Bhakdi, I recommended. It was a great sweeping overview. I think it's already had over 500,000 views. I'll be happy to post the link to it again at the top. People are asking me what can be done. I'm vaccinated, my mother is vaccinated, my child is vaccinated. Is there any way to flesh it out? Is there some kind of treatment? Or what can you give people as a hint?
No, there's nothing that's been tested. Yes, and that's of course a huge difficulty. We're now facing the most difficult problem in medicine, almost unsolvable, because it's also completely new. There's no experience. It's all trial and error, trial and error. And the question is always, when you try out something, how can you measure success? And I'm working on that, but it's a long road. It will take years. I'll just say it again. If someone has survived, then he or she should thank God and get down on their knees, knowing that certainly more than half of these batches were inactive. Certainly more, maybe 70%, 80%. And the batches that were active, they varied in how dangerous they were. You know, for a variety of reasons. And that is why it's the case that not everyone who got it will have to die. Rather, humans are resilient, the body has the ability to heal. He gave this to you, to me too. Be grateful for that. Be grateful. And return to this world that believes in a good creator.
Yes, definitely. I believe there was the option recently to file claims for injuries through a lawyer who posted on X. There were the specific badges from Pfizer, that is the COVID-19 vaccine, and there were, I believe, 3 that have been proven to have caused disproportionately high levels of harm or death. Of course, you can check which batch you received and was it recommended. Was it somehow more dangerous than average? Of course, that doesn't help those who already have serious illnesses or who have developed autoimmune diseases or who have died from a heart attack or turbo cancer. I know there are many who consider all of this conspiracy theory. But if you know someone who has become a victim or perhaps even died, can you still file a claim for injuries? Does it make a difference? I mean, will more attention or focus be placed on it so that the public actually wakes up and realizes this wasn't for the good of the people?
Yes, Mr. Friedrich, those are questions that are very difficult to answer. Because you know that there are breaks built in here everywhere. And that's precisely why this Federal Court of Justice ruling in Germany is so important, because there are no more breaks there. And I'm familiar with this call regarding the 3 batches. The 3 batches are mentioned because those are the 3 batches that were examined by us, that is by our group in Modia, where these contaminants were detected in high concentrations. And since it's now known that these contaminations are life-threatening, it is no longer up to us or others to prove that this is the cause. It is up to the manufacturers to prove that these contaminants are harmless. And that is really the basis for this lawsuit. Although, I must say, I'm not sure if it will succeed. Because the Federal Court of Justice in Germany allows that one can and should obtain information. And that is what I would do first. I would first get the information out. And if they can't answer the questions, for example, have you really ruled that out? And if they say we haven't tested it, then comes the next step. But first, you have to formulate the questions and, in principle, sue to obtain the answers. The lawsuit must aim to obtain the answers, the information.
Yes. We can see that the rule of law still works after all, just like the RKI files or the nuclear files which were obtained through litigation, or of course here, where the Federal Court of Justice ruled accordingly. What's important is that the information gets out. But it is quite striking that the Federal Court of Justice ruling is issued, and then the founders of BioNTech say they're leaving BioNTech to start something new, something similar actually, but under a new protective umbrella. And that could, of course, course, be a correlation, perhaps that they're protecting themselves or something. On the other hand, we also know that the EU, under von der Leyen at that time, of course, excluded liability for the companies and assumed liability for the EU. That's why you wouldn't have to fear, right? Or am I wrong about that?
Yes, that's not correct. And Helmut Sterz also explained that in his book. In the moment that fraud happens, in the moment that fraud occurs, and this is fraud, and the product is fraudulent, there is no protection there.
Oh, that would be interesting. Okay. Because as you know, I'm very active in finance and the economy, and I know some people were truly shocked by this abrupt departure of the two founders and saviors, as they were touted. And apparently, it came as a great surprise even to employees. And of course, there are now plenty of rumors circulating, and that was, after all, following the Federal Court of Justice ruling.
1 day later.
1 day later, exactly. And that's, of course, quite telling, so everyone can draw their own conclusions. Nothing happens without reason. So why exactly 1 day after the BGH ruling was announced? That's very interesting and intriguing. Malicious tongues claim the rats are leaving the sinking ship. They want to protect themselves from any liability claims.
Yes, I hope that that ship sinks. Clearly, if BioNTech is successfully sued, I mean, a somewhat naive thought of mine is that given the fraud that has now been proven, and that the product is, and still is, a fraud, it should be possible for the federal government to rescind the purchase agreement. We're speaking about fraudulent goods and a delivery of the wrong product, which has truly harmed people. If they were to do that, or if they were forced to do so, I don't know how, but that's billions. I mean, we're speaking about billions, Mr. Friedrich. And BioNTech has 17 or 15 billion in the bank. So they could immediately pay out like 2, 3, 4, 5 billion, pay it back. And then if the government were to set up a relief fund, that would be something, wouldn't it, for the vaccine injured, for those harmed by the vaccinations?
Yes, indeed, indeed. Now, if we take a look at excess mortality in recent years, at the beginning of this year it was a bit higher, which could be due to the flu. Last year it was even slightly below the average trend, and in 2024 it was...
No. Most of these calculations aren't accurate. And there are so many interpretations of that as well. I won't get into it. The interpretations that are correct are overwhelmingly clear. There is excess mortality right now, and it's significant. It's not small, it is large, and it's bad. And we have a decline in births as well.
Yes, it's striking. Do you think it also has something to do with the administration of this vaccine, that people are less fertile?
Of course, there were countless intrauterine deaths and miscarriages.
Yes, the coming years will reveal this. I'm curious to hear your opinions and examples from your circle of acquaintances. It's often the case that someone suddenly dies or develops cancer. Many people might not even be able to make the connection to the COVID-19 vaccine.
It is completely clear by now. And internationally, there are several movements seeking to impose a moratorium on all mRNA vaccines. And I want to say, and I'm closing with this, I'll be online in Florida tomorrow.
I wanted to ask you about that. You mentioned before that you're supporting the Florida Health Department. What exactly are you doing there?
I'm conducting a training session for the doctors there.
Wow, okay.
And the training session is on the topic, are mRNA vaccines safe? And of course, there's only one answer, and I'll explain why. And the health minister is present, so he's there.
Oh, Florida or the US?
Florida.
Wow, okay.
That is the great Ladapo, the Surgeon General, who of course is working with DeSantis. And you know that Florida is heading in the same direction as Alabama, Idaho, and Arkansas. They want to stop the whole thing.
Yep. Maybe he'll also manage to connect with Robert Kennedy, so he'll do something with Make America Healthy Again. He's been a critic, after all. He was also at demonstrations in Germany.
Of course.
And I think the right people are definitely coming together now. In case you see him, say hello from me. I'd love to invite him for an interview.
Yes, unfortunately, Kennedy is in poor health right now. He needs surgery.
Ah, okay.
Yes.
Nevertheless, after that, I'd be happy to interview him, because when someone like the US Secretary of Health says things like that, and he's already made a lot of changes in the US with the food pyramid and so on, as well as with the pharmaceutical companies, then it's definitely for the good of humanity.
Yes, that's correct.
Mr. Bhakdi, best luck in Florida. We'll see and hear from you again. And if you have any news, please feel free to reach out to us. Best luck, all the best, stay healthy, thank you.
Thanks to all of you. Goodbye.
You witnessed or experienced vaccine damages? Record it on Vetopedia, the free encyclopedia for counter voices. www.vetopedia.org/en